Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Danny, and today, Great.com talks with Pat Bradley, the founder of Crisis Aid. If you haven't heard of it yet, Crisis Aid works to provide life saving hope and services to the most vulnerable around the globe. If you're new here to this podcast, before we begin, pause it, press subscribe on YouTube or in a podcast app because we're going to learn a lot today. Hi, Pat, and welcome to Break.com Talks.
Hi, Danny. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. I love to learn more. I loved to learn more about your organization as I was doing my research. But today I want to open with you, learning more about your story, because I believe that you had a very impactful experience around 20 something years ago. And that led you in this way that you are, in this path that you are right now. So would you mind sharing about this experience and what has been going on since then?
Sure. To make a really long story short, which the story's in our book, I was an alcoholic. I was married, wife, two small children. I had a job, I was working, but I was an alcoholic, and I just don't know what else to say, but that's exactly what I was. And so my wife one day just got fed up and kicked me out and divorced me. And that was the lowest point of my entire life, that I had lost everything. I had to move into my parents' basement, which was one of the most humbling experiences I've ever experienced. But to go on, the night she kicked me out, the next day I found Alcoholics Anonymous. And I began going to AA meetings and stopped drinking and started to sober up. And about a year after that, after the divorce was final, I accepted a new position at a new company, a new startup company. And it was like my first entrepreneurial type of venture. And the company became, probably within next 3 to 6 months, we became wildly successful. So I had everything I wanted at that point in time. Prior to the divorce, we would have to borrow money from my wife's parents just to feed our children all week, because I didn't make much money. So now I had money, I had status, I had everything I thought I wanted, but I didn't have my wife and I didn't have my children. And so that led me on a quest for what do I do? I wanted to find, I grew up in a Catholic church, but I wasn't spiritual and I hadn't been to church in years. So I started asking God to help me. And one thing led to another. I went to a church where my ex-wife was taking my children. And at that point, I heard about Jesus Christ in a way I'd never heard about that he really wanted a relationship with me. Before, it was just like all dogma and it was all a book. But this was very personal. And so I gave my life to Christ that night. And 6 months after that, my ex-wife and I got remarried. And so she's been my best friend, my wife, my lover, my everything ever since. And it's like 40 some odd years ago now.
Okay, you can go on. I'm just
okay.
I just loved it.
Okay, yeah. So God really touched our hearts for missions, foreign missions, the foreign field. And so I took a trip to the Soviet Union, and that was my very first taste of being out of the country doing Christian work. And Danny, I got hooked. It was like the hook entered. The stories are more elongated in the book. For time, I won't go into all the details. But that began an odyssey of taking trips on my vacation time, like maybe 2-3 weeks a year. And I would go to countries, smuggle Bibles in where Christians were being persecuted. But in the year 2000, I went to South Sudan. And we went on a research trip because we were hearing the incredible atrocities that were going on. And Danny, that was one of the most life-changing experiences I've ever had. And so our last day in the country, we were there just to explore this, to see if what we were hearing was true. And what we found out is what we were hearing was way understated of what was actually happening on the ground. Absolute genocide was just horrible. So came across these people. It was about 70 of them, men, women, and children, and they were in this desert. And their village had been attacked the night before, and we came across them. and we had nothing. They had nothing. Some of them didn't even have clothes on. It was in the middle of their summer, and it was like 120 degrees. They were hundreds of miles from food, water, or any kind of shelter. We had nothing that we could give them. And that was our last day in the country. We had to head back out, which was like a 2-day drive to get to where we needed to go to come home. So I remember looking back over my shoulder as we were pulling away from them. And Danny, I heard this voice say to me, doing nothing is no longer an option. And I knew exactly what that meant. That meant that I needed to work towards providing food, water, and shelter to people in need. And so that was in February of 2000. Went back in September of 2000, partnered with a friend from South Africa, and we delivered 4,000 or 2-pound bag of rice to 4,000 people. And that began the work of Crisis Aid. And then so we worked in South Sudan 7 or 8 years. And in that time, we also worked in Afghanistan, Pakistan, North Korea. So I worked spread around. And today now, the organization is 20 years old this year. And we are presently, most of our work is in East Africa. We've worked in 11 countries, but right now we have orphanages, very much involved in human trafficking there. We've been in a human trafficking field since 2006 was the first girl we ever rescued. Cambodia, Haiti, Egypt, a couple other countries, but all of our work now is either in the United States or it's in East Africa. And we have pediatric hospitals that we've built and other projects.
Well, we'll definitely try to cover some of those projects, but I am really delighted by the beauty of the story that you shared with us. And I think that it's so very important when we look at our past and we see the mistakes, but we're not like restrained them. So we're definitely going to talk a little bit more about your book also at the end of it. I really want to let people know what's going on there. But wow, and it's really impressive how much it's grown, right? You began with so very little, with the thing that you could in fact work on, to a greater organization now that is acting in multiple places. And that makes me think that all of those places, of course, they have things in common, because, we know the consequences of the lack of development, and historical processes, but they must have very specific or some specificities to each one of them. And it must be really hard to tackle all of them. And one of the things that you mentioned was human trafficking. How can you effectively work to prevent that from happening, to fight that? What is the work that you're doing?
Well, our work started in 2006, was the first girl we rescued in East Africa. She was in a red light district. There were thousands of girls. It's one of the largest red light districts in the world. And Danny, I don't know how else to explain it. It's like hell on earth. It's one of the most horrible places I've ever been. But we went in there that night, our first night, and we started talking to girls, and literally this is what happened. We met this girl, we spoke to her. I said, "Are you ready to get out of here tonight?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Is your pimp around?" And she said, "He's not here tonight." I said, "So you can come tonight?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, go get your stuff and we'll wait for you right here." So she came back about 10 minutes later, and she had it's like a small shopping bag, like a Walmart shopping bag. She was 16 years old. She'd been in there 4 years, and all her worldly possessions fit in this bag. But when she came around the corner, knowing that she was getting out that night, the smile on her face lit up this dark alley like I've never seen. It was unbelievable. And so, excuse me, we're walking out with this girl, Danny, and I'm thinking in the back of my mind, have I lost my brains? What are we going to do with her? When we went in there that night, there was no intention of coming out with a girl or rescuing anyone. But it was one of those moments where doing nothing was not an option. We had to do something. And so that began, that was in December of 2006, January of 2007. I was back there. We got 2 more girls, and by March we had 7 girls out of this red light district. And we rented a home, and that's what started our what we call our SAFE campaign. And so to date, we've gotten over 2,000 girls that have been rescued, received services, and we've expanded from not just having refuge homes where we actually care for the girls and they live and they stay with us for a year or 2 years. We give them everything they need to start their life over. But in the United States now, we've started about 3 years ago what we call our Child Anti-Exploitation Program. And this is where we actually get into the true prevention side of the equation. Working side by side with law enforcement officers, we are now in 5 different police departments. We have full-time staff in each of these departments working with the Internet Crimes Against Children unit, and that's where the human trafficking work begins. And so now we're literally getting our hands on these girls before the predators do. And it's unbelievable to sit there and see what is going on and how widespread it is. But for years, we were asking ourselves, what can we do to prevent? What can we do to prevent? And, advocacy and education is important. But at the end of the day, who have we saved? We don't, So working side by side with law enforcement has really opened up the gates for us now.
Well, I can imagine, because that was the thing that I kept thinking here as you spoke. It's something really hard to actually get to the root of as just civilians. It's complicated. It's a frame issue sometimes. So the thing just gets bigger, and those partnerships must be vital, in fact, to actually create a change. And which other programs, or maybe, I'm sorry, I'm just going to stop for a second. Yeah, thank you. But what other programs would you highlight during this 20 years history that show the sort of commitment that you had?
Well, we started feeding programs like in South Sudan, and then we were working in Afghanistan doing food programs. But in 2003, we went into East African country. I cannot name it because of political sensitivities, and we still work there today. But there was an internet news headline I saw sitting in my office. At the time, I was working full-time as a businessman with marketing advertising. So I had an ad agency when I had 4 partners, and so they pretty much let me do my thing with crisis aid as long as I helped them manage the business. So I showed up in the capital city in this East African country with a yellow Post-it note and a phone number, and that's all I had. And but I just knew that I saw this internet headline that said 14 million Africans, I'll say, at risk of death by starvation. And there was a famine going on. And so I showed up in the capital city about a month after that with a phone number, not knowing anything or anyone or where it was going to lead to. And so that led to a large church that had a development wing. And they took us around for the next 6 days out in the country, out in the bush, and showed us starvation on a level I've never seen before. Literally children dying because they don't have enough food. Adults were severely malnourished on the verge of death. And there were tens of thousands of them. And I remember the last day of our trip, we pulled into this village, and on the side of this hill, there was 250 moms, and they each had a child. Some had more than one, but each child was severely malnourished. And when I use that term, Danny, it means that if that child doesn't get help, that child will die 100% of the time. And so there's a mom, there's 250 children minimum, and I'm this guy, and I'm like, what are we going to do about this? And the elders were waiting for us, and we spoke to them, and they pleaded with us to please do something. And so I knew what we needed to do at that point was to develop a therapeutic feeding center, which is like an emergency room in the bush that handles severely malnourished children, because there's a very special way of doing that. And so I said, okay, we'll put a TFC, is what we call it, a TFC. We will build a TFC and provide the services, and to God be the glory. But when I made that promise, Danny, we were only a couple years old. We had $350 in the bank for crisis aid, but I knew building this TFC and getting it all set up for 3 to 6 months would be a $100,000 endeavor. And I had no clue where that money was going to come from. And so flying back from East Africa to America, half the time I'm thinking, I have lost my mind. What have I done? But yet I made a promise to somebody, and I had to keep my word. So I came back and I pulled my board together and told them what I saw, what I experienced. and what I promised, and half of them thought I was absolutely insane and that I lost everything. And but the funny thing happened. We started talking about it within 6 to 9 weeks. Over $100,000 came in for that project. We only had 40 people on a mailing list, and most of those were my family, and none of them would talk to me anymore because they already give me enough money. Now I'm sitting here in front of you 20 years later. I'm still not sure how that happened. So we started, and that's where we started our food programs and dealing with severely malnourished children, which led to spreading, bigger programs, more children. Like right now, we're feeding like 10,000 people a month. We built 2 pediatric hospitals that are operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's just some of what we do.
Well, I think that's definitely a testimony of the power of people getting together and seeing that they can actually do something good if they don't just look at things and let
Yeah.
it pass by, right?
Right.
We just try to touch some base here on the great work that you've been doing, but our listeners can definitely go to your website, which is crisisaid.org. Please go there. You can check it. You can have like impact information. You can see more detailed stories and programs that we unfortunately won't have time to cover today. And it's a very, I would say, educational website, if you think, that takes you out of your bubble of your basically life, daily things, to get to know what's going on all around. And thinking of that, I need to move to another point, that is your book, that I'm quite interested to know a little bit more about. You have a new book coming that is Born for Rescue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that you have a lot of your story there, and you're definitely a great storyteller, I can tell. So what is going on? What moved you to buy this new book, and how do you introduce crisis aid to new audiences through it?
Well, really what led me to read the book is that over the years, we just tell stories. We bring people on vision trips and come and see. And then as a natural part of that, you just tell stories of some of the incredible experiences that we've had. And, people would say, oh, you should write a book, you should write a book. And I'm like, yeah, right, I'm going to write a book. I can't sit still, so I can't see myself writing this book. But it started to dawn on me that, there's a lot of people that sit around wanting to know, like, does my life really matter? And, we've all had those thoughts, and we may not express those to a lot of people or anyone else, frankly, but everybody wants to know that their life really does matter, but they don't know where or how to do it. And so, like for my story, I was one step away from living under a bridge as an alcoholic. That's how far I sank down. But through God, through doing everything I could possibly do, today, you fast forward and I look back on our life, and I mean, we've helped over 3 million people through crisis aid. But what people will get from reading the book is they'll see that I'm really no different than them. And then if I can do it, they can do it. So it's my goal is that it inspires people to want to do something outside of themselves to help another human being. And so I will say this. I read a book, Danny, in 1985. I'm sure get an idea how old I am. So the first night I gave my life to Christ, I went into this church bookstore, and there was a book called God's Smuggler. And it was about a guy named Brother Andrew who went behind the Iron Curtain and came out and told the world about what was happening with Christian persecution. And that book so touched my heart and so moved me that I can honestly make this statement. Had I not read that book then, I would not be doing what I do today, and Crisis Aid would have never been started. So that book literally inspired me to, you know what, my life does matter. And it's important. I've been given great gifts and great abilities to do things, and I'm responsible not just to do what I can, but I'm responsible for the good and the outcomes of those actions. And so by looking at it that way, expanding your thought of, does my life matter and what can I do? It's a matter of just saying yes and stepping out. And so the first person you see that needs help, help them and just see where it goes.
Sounds simple, right? And I do
Yeah.
hope that people get this message more often, and keep thinking about that. And we talked about the past, about the book, but let's talk about the future. So, what is next for you in Crisis Aid?
Well, we are starting the process now of like looking for the next generation. Like, so I'm not going to be here forever, but I want Crisis Aid going for the next 100 years or longer. So we're looking at that now and how to set up for that. So for instance, like in East Africa, we employ over 100 people, but they're all East Africans. They're not Americans. So that's our model on how we want to do. We're looking at we've opened businesses in East Africa to help create profits, create jobs, job training, but the profits go back into the project and help bring sustainability into the projects to cover operating costs. So as we go more and more into the future, we're going to look more at a holistic approach to everything we do that way. And then I think the other thing is, I want people to understand how simple it really is. It's so simple to make a difference and to know what your life's purpose is. It's simple. It's not hard. We don't need to figure it out. Actually, it's already in our heart. So like, I'll answer that question a lot of times. Is like, I would say to you, hey, Danny, if money wasn't an object, what would you do? And most people can come up with an answer pretty quickly. And it's like, okay, why don't you look in that direction to see if there are things you can do to make a difference for someone else. So.
Well, yeah, I think this is vital talk, and I do hope in that spirit, I need to ask you this, and a very important question for us today. That is, what are the ways that people can help you in your fight? You can get moving towards this next step, as you mentioned.
Sure. I mean, I'm just going to be transparent, okay? We need money. We cannot do what we do without money. I'm sensitive to the fact that all nonprofits they just want money, money, money. Well, we do because we can't work without it. People want us to rescue girls out of human trafficking. Well, that costs a lot of money to do those things. So we need money so they can go online and make a donation or become like a monthly partner. They can also order the book because 100% of the profits or proceeds from the book go back into Crisis Aid. And then they can tell their friends. I mean, word of mouth. I spent 35 years in advertising and marketing, consumer marketing for some of the largest beer brands in the world, truly global brands. And all that experience, I can tell you one thing, the word of mouth is the absolute best way to advertise. And if people learn about what we do and then tell their friends to check us out, that would be an immense, immense help.
Wow, that's just wonderful. And I fully agree with you. Word of mouth, it goes a long way, right?
Yeah.
And I do hope that our audience now gets in touch with you. And if you need more information for everybody listening, you can check out the article we're going to publish with this episode on our website. You can have more information on the book. You can have more information about Crisis Aid. And please, if you have any means to help anyone, really reach out. We definitely need this help. Thank you so much, Pat. I loved talking to you today. It was a great talk.
Can I mention one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
They can order the book today. They can go to Born for Rescue, one word, bornforrescue.com.
That's wonderful. We add that on our article as well.
Okay,
Go there.
cool.
This guy's a storyteller. I love talking to you. And for everybody listening, also, thank you so much for being here with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, press subscribe on YouTube or on your podcast, because that helps me spread the word about the importance of Crisis Aid. Go check their website, go buy their book, go help out, and please go back next week for another episode.